for joining this session. Trying to make sure I have all my presentation and everything together, just because I'm sure we all know how Zoom can be, especially with all the screen sharing. But hi again, I'm Asma. I'm just gonna give you a little background on who I am and then go right into the presentation. Feel free to drop any questions into the chat, maybe anything that you think I might have didn't include that you're kind of curious about when I start talking a little bit more. But yeah, so I'm just gonna jump right in. So my name is Asma Walton. My background in education is I have a BFA in art education from Michigan State University, and I also have an MA in arts politics from NYU. And for the past few years, I've actually been working in museums. So I've had a few museum fellowships and internships since I finished my master's a few years back. So today I'm going to be talking about creating spaces for supplemental arts education in underserved communities. And I'm specifically going to go into a project that I have been working on since kind of earlier this year called the Black Art Library. So the Black Art Library was an idea that I had maybe towards the end of 2019. And I really just wanted to kind of create some sort of resource that people could use to learn a little bit more about Black art. So I had been on social media on my personal account, sharing as much about Black artists as possible, just posting a painting, posting a sculpture, just so people kind of in my circle, in my peer group, can maybe see something that kind of piqued their interest. And a lot of people that I know, they're not really into art. I'm kind of the art one out of my friends. And I really often want to share as much of the knowledge that I have, just because people kind of just assume that they're not interested in the arts because they haven't had any exposure to it. And that all goes back to the access to kind of art education and art courses in general. So the Black Art Library started out kind of just as this Instagram account where I share the books that I was kind of collecting that I wanted to eventually be able to share with other people, but it kind of just started out as a way for people can follow along with my journey of what I am doing. So every day I was kind of posting some of the books that I have purchased recently and all of the books I was purchasing with my own money. And it was really just, it was kind of fun for me in the beginning. And I really didn't think too far down the line as to what it was going to look like. And I really felt the need to kind of start some kind of resource like this because I know that it's needed. I grew up, so I'm from Detroit. So I grew up in Detroit Public Schools, and Detroit Public Schools have performing arts, but they do not have any visual arts. So no painting classes, no ceramics, none of those things, which I didn't even really realize that other, schools and high schools had those things until I got to the art education program at Michigan State and I started to talk to the people in my cohort. So I was the only Black student in the cohort. And sometimes we would just be talking and I realized that all of them had had art classes throughout their high school experiences and prior to high school. But they also had they had ceramics, they had kilns in their classrooms, they had all of these resources that I didn't even realize that other students had. And it kind of put me at a disadvantage just because when I was coming in, I was learning all of those things for the first time. I was learning how to use a kiln for the first time. And it was just kind of an eye-opening experience that, oh, other students do have access to things like this, just not in the area that I'm from. And it kind of was interesting because they also didn't realize that some schools didn't have those resources as well. They knew that, especially as students that were going into education, but it was kind of different when they actually got a chance to kind of talk with someone in the same kind of space that they're in that had a completely different experience. My reason for wanting to go into art education was really different from pretty much everyone in my cohort, because a lot of them were motivated by the fact that they had really great art classes. They had a really great art teacher. And that was the reason why they wanted to go into arts education. And I think maybe for me, it was kind of the opposite. And it was kind of just, I think this is something that I'll be good at. And I think it's something that I'll really enjoy. So with the Black Art Library, it was a way to kind of start building something that I can eventually share to people kind of like me that maybe are a little bit interested in art, but they do not know where to find the information. They don't know, if you don't know what you don't know, you don't know what to look for. So even though people have access to Google, some people have, constant internet access, if you don't know how to search for some of those things, you're never really going to find the information. So the Black Art Library was me accumulating all of that information kind of in one space so people would be able to access it. And when the pandemic hit, it kind of gave me more time to just collect books because I was working from home. And I continued to collect books, and time went by, and the following on the Instagram account continued to grow. And I decided, I was like, well, maybe I'll just see if anyone is interested in donating books to the Black Art Library. So I decided to share an Amazon wish list that I had just created just for my birthday. And it was just something that I would just put out there to see if people were interested in donating. And I actually started to receive books. And I was really surprised. And I think that was really the point where I knew this project would kind of grow kind of quickly into something a lot bigger than I had thought about it as. So that was in April, and around July, I decided that I wanted to start fundraising just for the cost of more books. And eventually I realized that this needs to be a physical space and a physical location in Detroit. So that's right now what the goal is, to have a physical space that acts as more of so a reading room and a non-lending library for people to come in and be able to absorb kind of these resources. You can spend a day kind of looking at these books and having the time to really dig into this information. And even if it's completely new to you, you know that you can come back and pick up where you left off. So I ended up raising about $5,000 maybe around in July, just starting in July, maybe about by the end of August, I was to about $5,000. And it just showed me that a lot of people were really kind of rooting for this project and really interested in it. So I actually did a pop-up event for the Black Art Library a few weeks back at a artist's house in Detroit. And it is actually owned by an artist who eventually is going to turn this into something different. So I was able to kind of set up this space. I had to buy some bookshelves, and kind of, this was the first time being able to put the library into a physical space. And some of the things that I observed just from this short time in this space was that there were a lot of people that were interested in something like this, but they didn't really know how to find it. So I had kind of people of all ages. So the photo with the mother and daughter on the right side, they saw it on Instagram. She reads a lot to her daughter who is 4 years old. They had a challenge in September of reading 100 books, and they had about 5 books left, and they decided to spend the day at the pop-up reading all of these books that they hadn't come across before to finish off their 100 books for September. I had I really did have all ages, but on the photo on the other side, is two young girls that had kind of found a few books. They're actually both reading Faith Ringgold books, or books illustrated by Faith Ringgold, and spending some time with it. There were people that kind of came in and spent some time looking at the rare book table. There were people that just kind of sat down, found a spot in the space and spent a few hours reading a book. There were people that came that actually read a whole book. They decided to find one small book that they could actually tackle during this time. I made it a point to make sure that I had a response kind of area. That's what the sticky notes are, just because I come from a museum background, and a sticky note wall is always kind of a good way to get people to engage. So I really wanted people to come into the space and feel comfortable. And I really wanted them to browse and do as much as they could in that space. I had people come up to me. There was one guy in particular who he kind of is a creative, but not in the visual art sense. So he makes music. And he told me that, I didn't really know about any other artists besides Basquiat. That was kind of, the only artist that I ever learned about. And he's told me about a book that he came across that kind of talked about how a lot of Black artists moved to Paris and kind of worked in Paris kind of around Harlem Renaissance after World War I and after World War II. And he was saying that he never knew that something like that had happened. And he came back for both days of the pop-up, and he was just really excited to be able to see some more of this information. There was a group of young teens canvassing the neighborhood, kind of telling the neighborhood about different solar energy and different resources. And they stopped into the library and they were super excited. And they sat down for a few minutes to look at all these books. And that was really eye-opening to me, because the kids are, it's for everyone, but being able to see youth involved and getting interested is really exciting, because they'll take that information, pass it on to their friends, and even pass it on to their parents. And that, I think that's really kind of the beginning of the cycle, and how we want to make sure that we're passing on this information. And we have to make sure that these resources are actually available to individuals that want to learn something new. So the Black Art Library will be just one of those spaces that exists somewhere in the world, but we do have to make sure that we're able to continue to create them, because there are not art classes in every public school and in the charter schools. There, it just doesn't exist. And I think we do need to realize that we do have to create these other kind of resources and these other kind of spaces that community members will feel comfortable being a part of. Community members do not always feel comfortable going into a museum, going into an art gallery, just because those spaces tend to be very, very intimidating. And I know that, and I'm someone that works in them. So kind of more community-based art education spaces will kind of help break down some of those barriers between art and just kind of the community, and being able to just have a regular conversation where you don't need to have a PhD in art history to just be able to share something that you've learned or ask a question, just because none of us know all of the answers. And I think once we're able to kind of spread that information a little more and let people know it's okay to not have the answers, and even us arts professionals do not always know everything about the art, I think we will be able to continue to build on all of these resources that we're really searching for, and that the community can really grow from. And these were just some more of the photos from that weekend. And these ones kind of show the response wall. And one of the questions was, well, were there any artists that you learned about that you didn't really know anything about before, or were there any specific books? So you see mentions of Pope L, Carol Walker, Some people mentioned the books that they were reading. So one of the books that I have in the collection is Blackmail, and it is actually a show that was curated by Thelma Golden at the Whitney before she ended up moving to the Studio Museum. And it really was just a really great experience to kind of get this feedback from all of these individuals that came into the space. You see names Gordon Parks, someone I learned a lot about Romeo Bearden today. And this was just really a way that I could see some of that work that I'm trying to do with this project. And that really is just the beginning for kind of work like this, specifically, you know, in my Detroit community, which Detroit is a very creative place. The arts have always kind of thrived in Detroit, but the resources have kind of been stripped away. And I think it's up to us arts educators to identify what areas and what neighborhoods and what communities that we actually have tools that we can hand over to them. Like, what do I have that I can offer this community to be able to get them a little more interested into the art world and take away a little bit of that uncertainty about getting involved into the arts, and just how can I share a little bit more of my information. So that was really just kind of what I wanted to share, and it just as a way to kind of show some of that community work that can be done. And this is a process, so I'm very early at the beginning stages of this, but I'll continue to do pop-ups to kind of get the community oriented with the project. So when it does pop up somewhere, it's not just, well, what is this thing that's just coming into our space, into our neighborhood? I want to build that foundation for this project so people are familiar with and that they're really comfortable with it. And I think that's something that's super important for arts organizations to always consider. So I'm open to comments and questions for our last few minutes. So feel free to drop any questions that you have into the chat and I can answer them.
So it's only, can you hear me? Asmaa?
Yes, I can hear you.
So it looks like, I mean,
yes.
we are a small group, so probably just like talk to you with my question. So, you know, I'm teaching at the University of Arizona in School of Art. And so thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. Yes, I never thought about this kind of wonderful ideas out there in your neighborhood. And so after pandemic, I started walking a lot in my neighborhood. And suddenly there was a very small, tiny library set up in my like a neighborhood. So it's about size. It's about like a small like bookcase size. It's a standalone outside, like just like a. It's not inside the house, but outside. Somebody built it, like it's more like a library. And then so to put like children's books and a lot of books, people kind of picking and then drop it, and you know nobody actually control anything. So anyone actually drop the book, anyone actually check out, self checkout. So it's a wonderful way of like using library in that kind of like a neighborhood. So it's a great idea. Yeah, this is a great idea. So my question is, and so when you collect the Black art, you know, artists and a lot of books, so based on your so far collection, and also based on your research, do you think there should be more books written about Black artists, like, for example, like historically or more contemporary? Or do you have any sense about it, or where you know encourage more authors to write more? Oh, I can hear you. So can you?
Kind of gets me to something that I think of. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, now, yeah.
Okay, good. So that's actually a really great question, and it kind of makes me think about something I'm always thinking about, and it's like, well, what am I going to get to a point where I have every book that has already been written?
about Black artists, because one, I think there have probably been a lot of opportunities in the past to write about some of these artists that are probably now kind of forgotten in time. But we can't go back. But I think it is really important to make sure that the artists, the Black artists that are currently working, that the publications are being, created for them. And I think we see a lot of that now. We see a lot of those publications being created and kind of the books being put out, but we're still seeing books being put out about artists that have been working maybe since the 80s, and they've never gotten a full kind of book that shows their whole kind of catalog and their career, and some of that is just now coming out. So I think that's just the nature of the art. Some things we don't really learn about till years later, but I think it's always important to continue to do that research and continue to write those stories and to interview those living artists, because I think we have to make sure that we're keeping track of like all of that information, just because we see so much of kind of, when people think of art history, they think mostly about the European like art history, and that's what people know, because that's what so much of the books and the information that is available to us, that's what we see. So we just have to make sure that we're making up for that with filling in those gaps with all of the other artists and the other histories across art and across culture that we can really kind of learn from as well. So I think we just have to continue writing, continue getting people to tell those stories.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for answering my question. And I'm so excited about this. And probably, hopefully, more the library collect more Black art, artists. In what I only see in the library, like Matisse or Picasso or someone like a mainstream white, books, artist books. So that'll be great if you extend this research. I loved this idea. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And then there's a question in the chat that I'm going to address out. It's just about expanding a project like this into museums. So I'm super open to kind of working with different institutions. I actually have a project in the works with an institution that will be displaying the library next year. So this will happen in 2021, but I am always available to connect via email or the Black Art Library's account. So it's just Black Art Library on Instagram. That is where I get a lot of kind of, people that work at galleries reach out to kind of donate books, and people that do work in museum spaces. So definitely I'm always available that way. I'm very accessible as a person. So whatever way that someone can find me, I'm willing to kind of talk to them. Yep, no problem. All right, so that is all I have on my end. I know you guys have a few minutes left, and you might want to take a virtual break before you have to jump into your next session. But I just want to thank you guys so much for joining me, and make sure to follow the Black Art Library so you can, stay up to date on how this project is going and how, we're continuing to grow. And I really appreciate all of you guys.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, like ending, but actually there's
Yes,
another question actually just popped up.
Yes.
Maybe I don't want to miss you. Okay, I missed that question. Carissa, looks like you have a question, right?
Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, we got one more question in the chat.
We have 5 minutes,
problem.
I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, we still have 5 minutes. So.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so let me read this really quick. So yes, I actually did notice that people were kind of continuing their conversations about the books kind of past it, and a lot of people were interested in kind of engaging with me, kind of talking about kind of what they learned, kind of what book they